cities come to your mind when you think of Europe? I'm pretty sure that for most people it's cities like Paris, London, Barcelona, or Rome. Very few people would think of cities like Belgrade, Sofia, Minsk, or Chisinau. Although these cities are just as European, this contrast reveals a significant divide in Europe, the often overlooked East on one side and the celebrated and familiar West on the other. Western Europe is known for its prosperous and advanced economies, boasting an average GDP per capita of around $68,000. In contrast, Eastern Europe lags behind significantly, with a GDP per capita of just around $14,000. A similar disparity emerges when we map GNI per capita. On this map, regions shaded in red indicate the areas with the lowest income levels, while those in green represent the highest. You can clearly see that majority of the high-income areas are in Western Europe, while the majority of low-income areas are in Eastern Europe. Europe is split by an invisible economic line, one that hasn't shifted an inch since World War II. But why? Why is there such a stark contrast between Eastern and Western Europe, even though they share the same continent? To uncover the answer, we need to dive into Europe's history and geography. In today's video, we'll explore how Eastern Europe became so poor while Western Europe grew so rich. Despite being the second smallest continent in the world, Europe has been the most powerful continent for the last 2 centuries. Many of the world's top economic giants call Europe home, giving it unmatched influence in world politics. If we look at its map, to the south, Europe is framed by the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the Caspian Sea. To the north, it touches the Arctic Ocean, and to its west is the Atlantic Ocean. Ireland and Iceland, located in the Atlantic Ocean, are also part of Europe, and even Greenland, though closer to North America, is culturally and politically tied to Europe. This raises an important question that despite being culturally, religiously, and geographically connected, why is there such a massive gap in development between Eastern and Western Europe? To uncover the first reason behind this divide, we need to travel back 80 years to the aftermath of World War II, when the map of Europe looked like this. The green-coloured countries embraced democracy and capitalism, while the red ones fell under Soviet control or adopted its communist ideology, and this split set the stage for most of the economic disparity that we see today. Communism, often referred to as socialism, was based on the idea that a country's resources, businesses, and land should be owned and managed by the government. The goal was to ensure that wealth was evenly distributed, giving everyone equal access to essentials like healthcare, education, and housing, rather than allowing only a few to become wealthy. However, this system had a major flaw. With the government controlling all profits, people had little motivation to start businesses or innovate, curtailing growth and progress. In a communist system, all businesses were owned by the government, which distributed profits equally among everyone. But this raised a critical question. Why would anyone work harder if everyone received the same share, regardless of effort? On the other hand, capitalist societies allowed individuals the freedom to start their own businesses, keep their profits, and operate independently. The government's role was limited to collecting taxes, which was a portion of those profits, and everything else was left to the business owners. During that time, people in Western Europe rarely visited Eastern Europe, and those in Eastern Europe also avoided going to Western Europe. They believed that Western Europe was an evil capitalist society. But during this same time, from 1945 to 1991, Western Europe thrived under capitalism, building industries and progressing far ahead of Eastern Europe. Then in 1991, communism collapsed, the Soviet Union disintegrated, and all European nations which were previously under Soviet Union's control gained independence. But even today, more than 30 years after the fall of communism, Eastern Europe lags far behind Western Europe. But why is that? A key reason lies in its geography. Eastern Europe is caught between 2 extremes. On one side are the fertile plains of Ukraine, Poland, and Belarus, which makes it ideal for agriculture. But on the other hand, these same flatlands have historically made these countries easy targets for invaders. This vulnerability has turned them into the epicenter of conflicts in Europe. Poland, for example, holds the grim title of being one of the most invaded countries in Europe, targeted by empires ranging from Sweden and the Ottoman Empire to the Soviet Union. The lack of mountains in these Eastern European countries made it easy for invading armies to sweep through, loot and destroy everything in their path every few years. Despite their fertile lands, these nations rarely reaped the full benefits of agriculture due to constant conflict. On the other hand, southeastern Europe tells a different story. The Balkan countries are dominated by rugged mountains, making construction and infrastructure development incredibly challenging. This has kept them among the most underdeveloped regions in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe has struggled with peace and stability even after Soviet Union's collapse. In fact, every major conflict in Europe since 1991 has taken place in this region. These conflicts haven't just hurt their economies, they've also driven massive waves of emigration. For example, during the Yugoslav wars, millions fled the Balkan countries to Western Europe, leaving behind a severe shortage of skilled workers. The ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine has triggered another wave of mass emigration from both countries, once again casting doubt on Eastern Europe's future. However, if we look at the single most critical factor that makes Eastern Europe's geography less favourable, it's the region's limited access to the seas. Western Europe, in contrast, enjoys a significant advantage, being surrounded by water on almost all sides: the Baltic Sea to the northeast, the North Sea and Atlantic Ocean to the west, and the Mediterranean Sea to the south. This is why, in the 16th century, Western European countries had the advantage of exploring sea trade routes and discovering new continents. They established colonies, exploited their resources, and brought the wealth back home. This strategy was central to the rise of the British, Spanish, and French empires, which collectively controlled 40% of the world's wealth at their peak. Access to the seas was also a key factor in the Ottoman Empire's dominance for hundreds of years. In those days, having a port was synonymous with power. While Western Europe controlled global trade through its vast maritime networks, Eastern Europe remained largely landlocked and disconnected from this trade. Even the Eastern European countries with sea access faced challenges. For instance, Poland had to navigate the Danish Straits to reach the Atlantic Ocean. Since these straits were controlled by Sweden and Germany, they imposed fees for passage, further limiting Eastern Europe's ability to participate in global trade. Similarly, to access global trade, the countries of southeastern Europe had to pass through the Bosphorus Strait, which was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. Even after crossing it to reach the Atlantic Ocean, they had to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, a passage that was at different times controlled by Muslims, the Spanish, or the Ottoman Empire. So Eastern Europe was heavily dependent on Western Europe for maritime trade. Then, in the 20th century, Western Europe gained another natural advantage when large reserves of oil and gas were discovered in the North Sea. These reserves made Norway, Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Germany powers of the 21st century. On the other hand, Eastern Europe was not so fortunate when it comes to natural resources. Apart from its fertile lands, the region had no major discoveries of valuable resources. That said, Eastern Europe isn't entirely without natural advantages. Its agricultural production is so robust that if there was no influence of communism, the region could have become the world's breadbasket. However, even after gaining independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, the lingering effects of communism held many countries back for years. Only a few, like Poland, the Czech Republic, and Romania, managed to develop significantly, largely because they joined the European Union. But why didn't other Eastern European countries join the EU? The answer lies in the strict requirements for membership, and one of those key requirements is low levels of corruption. If we map the 10 most corrupt states in Europe, you'll notice they're all located in Eastern Europe. Now, this isn't to say that Western Europe is entirely free of corruption. It exists there too. However, in Western Europe, corruption rarely undermines national interests, which is why the region continues to dominate globally. This is also why countless young people from around the world still dream of moving to Europe, seeking a brighter future for themselves and their families. In short, geography and the legacy of communism are the two biggest factors holding Eastern Europe back from achieving the same level of wealth as Western Europe. But as the saying goes, every dog has its day. A similar shift is happening in Eastern Europe. Take Poland, for example, a country once among the poorest in Europe, now on track to become one of the continent's rising superpowers. We will soon cover Poland's remarkable transformation in detail in another video. But at the same time, several developed economies in Western Europe are facing significant challenges. Two striking examples are Ireland and the UK, which, despite having one of the highest GDP per capita in Europe, are experiencing signs of economic strain. Reports suggest that many people are choosing to leave Europe's wealthiest countries. To learn more about this, click on the videos about UK and Ireland that are appearing on your screen right now. These are all the sources we consulted for today's video. See you in the next video with another interesting topic.